I'm excited to let you know about today's Age Hacker podcast with Guy Odishaw from CerebralFit. This turns out to be a really fascinating conversation about diagnosing and treating brain disorders with energy, with bioenergy, including red light, infrared light, but beyond that, other modalities that are used to actually treat things like macular degeneration and dementia and PTSD and traumatic brain injury. I think you're going to find this really an interesting and inspiring conversation. It was super fun to have. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Age Hackers podcast, powered by Gladden Longevity, where our passion is helping you live young for a lifetime. I'm here today with Guy Odishaw, and we've been having kind of a fascinating conversation just prior to coming online here. Guy's doing some incredibly interesting work with regards to brain function, bioenergetics, etc. And I'm really excited to explore this for you with him. Guy, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about how you got into this. Give us the running start on on what brought you to this point where you're focused on brain health and bioenergetics and some of the cool stuff you're involved with.
Sure, absolutely. So, I keep finding that, the longer I do this, the longer this story is. I just keep developing more history.
Right.
So I find it a little
more
shocking
twists and turns.
when I say 30
Yeah.
years ago. But yeah, it was 30 years ago that when I was in pre-med in university and not having a good time, and just through weird things that happen in life, it was actually my mother suggested you should go to massage school. And I thought, what an obtuse thing. But I thought, well, a year off on my mom, this sounds great. So I went. Mm-hmm. The surprising thing was a few weeks in, I realized these are my people. It was everything medical school wasn't. We right. dealt with people and what was happening in people and not the abstract mm-hmm. science of medicine mm-hmm. that didn't really seem to involve people.
Right.
Yeah. So that really launched my career. I spent most of my time in integrative manual therapies, working with treatment-resistant chronic pain. That's kind of been my main wheelhouse. Then about 12 years ago, I got into bioelectric medicine, and that more and more kind of pulled my attention. And then probably last 5 years.
What was the transition there, if I can interrupt
Sure.
for a second, from biomechanical into bioenergetics? What actually stimulated that? I assume you were probably becoming a practitioner of multiple different types of manual therapy. I mean, I don't know, massage, Reiki, probably some PT, some myofascial release. I mean, there's a whole constellation of things that go on in that space.
Correct.
And I suspect, given your curiosity, that you started to push into a number of those things.
I did. I was trained as an acupuncturist, worked as an acupuncturist for a number of years, but left that behind because I felt I much preferred to have my hands on people than needles mm-hmm. leave the room. So, but yes, a large collection, which is why generally referred to as integrative manual therapies, is a large pool of techniques. But I also, parallel to my practicing career, I've worked in running integrative medicine clinics. I had one of the largest integrative clinics in the country, and it was within that milieu that I was introduced to bioelectric medicine. One of my providers. I was vaguely familiar with it, that it existed, but I'd had no real experience. And it was seeing the outcomes that this practitioner was getting. I would see the people mm-hmm. come in various conditions of terrible pain, disabled, whatever it was, and watch them walk out happy people. And after seeing this for a number of days, I was like, okay, I need to know what's going on here. So I went talked to this practitioner, and I was like, what are you doing? This defies reason. And mm-hmm. and then she, invited me to just kind of watch her work. And then she recruited me as an assistant and trained me. And that was really the big moment where I switched from what I was doing to what she was doing and expanded.
Okay. So what was she actually doing? Was this, can you describe this for the audience to give them a sense of what was actually happening?
In a simple form, she was doing microcurrent therapy. As a particular kind of microcurrent, it's called Russian microcurrent, is the kind of slang term for it. The technical is AccuScope and MyoPulse. These are two devices that have been around for about 40 years, so it's old technology. But in that it's old technology, there's still something that it does that nobody else does, which is it's a biofeedback-based microcurrent. So it's writing to the body, it's reading the signal coming out of the body, it's interpreting what is needed, sending a new waveform, and it does that every 2.5 seconds that it's on the body. It's reading and writing.
So this looks like a pad. It looks like a pen. It looks like a light. What does it look like?
Yeah. So we have a whole series of applicators where it can be completely passive, where it's just pads. Mostly we use a metal, so it's going to be probably a brass or some other, could be a gold plate that's on the body if you're doing passive. Or we have a whole host of different types of probes for applying current to the body, different reasons, different areas, to be said about that. But mostly, like that's a little bit just the application side. Mostly what's interesting about this particular equipment is how it derives a waveform and how it delivers it and how it modifies that waveform. That's its claim to fame. So it's
okay. So can you contrast this to something like pulsed electromagnetic frequency, like PEMF and PEMF mats? Because I think a lot of people have some experience with that or exposure to it. And in that literature, they talk about, putting energy into the body and doing it across certain frequencies in a way that the body can sort of grab what it needs from that and kind of rehabilitate itself, like rehabilitate the mitochondria or do other things, nervous system, et cetera. So how is this the same or different from PEMF?
Sure. Great question. I see we're going to just jump right into it here. I love it. So PEMF is taking an electrical signal and turning it into a magnetic signal and kind of broadcasting that into the body, right? But at that point, it's a non-physical waveform that's moving, through a magnetic medium, which is. But if we back up and we just go with the electrical signal itself before it's transduced through a coil. Now, it depends on the system. That might be a microcurrent. It might be a millivolt current, depending on your coil and whatnot. But in the microcurrent world, so if you think of tens unit is milliamps. Microcurrent is 1,000 times less. Right? So we're using in microamps. So we call it a bioidentical current. It's what our bodies are naturally running on all the time is microcurrent. Right? So microcurrent is our native electrical field, and then when we do microcurrent, we're putting in.
Just so the audience understands, let me just interrupt again for a second. So the tens unit, probably not everybody's familiar with that, but that's putting current into the body to kind of override a current, if I'm not mistaken, that basically then kind of squashes that other current because it's being overridden, and it can decrease things like pain signals for people and things like that. So what we're talking about is actually not putting in a super physiologic signal. With microcurrent, we're actually talking about matching the physiologic electrical signals that are in the body.
Correct.
Right? So just to clarify that for the audience.
Absolutely. This is a good way to think of it. So I think of tens as an oppositional force, and so the body works against it, but we leverage that. Like it makes a muscle contract when that muscle doesn't want to contract, and we use that as a form of exercise. So there are definitely some uses in tens, but they're relatively limited, right, in the milliamp range. But when we go to micro, now we're talking the language of the body, right? So our bodies are a lot of things, but if we pretend to be reductionists for a moment, we would say they are chemical electric entities, right? So there's two sides to every transaction in the body. There's a chemical side and an electric side. We're very familiar with pharmaceuticals that leverage the chemical side, supplements that leverage the chemical side, nutrition as a leverage to the chemical side. So we're very familiar with the chemical side of the equation. We've spent in the West, we've spent almost no time on the electrical side of the equation. So it's unexplored territory. So
right.
Now
So correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically all of these things are information, if you will, a supplement, food, a pharmaceutical. And there's been some interesting research done where they've actually mapped the energetics of the signal that's generated by the molecule at the receptor, and then been able to feed that energy into the receptor without the molecule being present.
Yes.
To sort of mimic, right, the chemical but the chemical is transduced into an energetic signal, quite honestly, which I assume is an electrical signal to some extent. There are chemical repercussions of a receptor being activated, right? Other molecules are activated that do other things in the cell. But there is also kind of an electrical energy that can do this. So in your world with the microcurrent, do you find that you're actually both working independent of what we'll call the supplement, food, pharmaceutical information, energetics, and also working in that space by being able to kind of mimic signals that would come from pharmaceuticals, food, or supplements? Are you working across both spaces, or how do you think of that?
Great question. So you're anticipating much of my favorite part of the talk, which is really getting into the information processing side, the software side. So I'm going to take a step back a little bit in what you just shared and make a bifurcation, just make a split in the conversation.
Yep.
And so it is to say, so yes to what you said about chemicals being information, but that moves us from the physical to the information level and a separate discussion, an interesting one, and one that I hope we'll talk about much today. But it is to say there's a level at which we have physical parts that are kind of pushing around other physical parts, whether those are chemicals or whatever. But we're seeing it happening on a physical level. You can look with imaging technology and see it. Right, it's physical. Okay, so then we move over into the energetic side, and then I'm talking about electricity. So we're still in the physical, can be measured area of forces, but it's not a chemical. Here we're working more with ions than with molecules or chemicals. Right, so we make a differentiation there that there's a way in which to interact with cell signaling at a chemical level, that's a physical substance which you can see, or an electric level, which is a pseudo-physical substance which you can measure but not necessarily see. But at a physical level, these are two different things. Then there's what you said, which is the information processing level. And that I would use, and one of my favorite researchers, Michael Levin at Tufts University, which is he's got this TAME theory that he's developing and with a group of people, technological approach to mind everywhere. So the conversation is emerging now to talk about mind on the level of chemistry or electricity, that there's a mind level, there's an intelligence. And you can interact with intelligence.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Please.
So we're used to thinking about intelligence as being a central nervous system, and I think people that are even more facile with the nervous system understand that it involves the peripheral nervous system as well, that there's an intelligence in that whole system. But I think now you may be talking about an intelligence that's maybe at a cellular level or subcellular level, where there are things going on. And with this microcurrent, what I'm envisioning is that there's an element of charge, and there's also an element of frequency, and then duration and pulse of these signals, if you will, because you can carry a lot of information inside of, by manipulating the level of charge and also manipulating the frequency and the pulses, if you will, of this signal that might come into a cell. So this is a very rich environment, I suspect. But are you talking about now intelligence at a cellular level, or what are we talking about?
Sure. Yeah. So in this model, mind at all levels. It is taking it all the way down to, into physics, to subatomic particles, right? And they're looking for the mind at that level, mind at the chemical level. And there's some good research showing that a simple chemical reaction that we had historically taken merely as physical actually has a level of intelligence to it. And we could get into how they test that and whatnot. But I am talking mostly at the level of cell networks. So getting into something that's like tissue, where you've got a cellular network, and there the operative piece, and why this is helpful is we get into like a level of computer analogy that people like get it instantly, but when we talk biology, it seems completely foreign. But at a cellular level, there are these things called gap junctions, and gap junctions are how cells communicate with one another. And when cells come together into a form of tissue or an organelle, they link up through those gap junctions. And you can think of this like our computer. A computer operates on ones and zeros, right? Ons and offs. And everything that's happening, our conversation right now on this video audio platform, all of this is happening with ones and zeros. So the same thing within tissues. To any group of cells, community of cells, there's this communication that's happening essentially in ones and zeros, although that's not technically true, but we can simplify it to on-offs. Gap junction open, gap junction closed. And that allows computation to happen. Just like our computer can compute things, it can do computation. Cells can do computation. And this level of intelligence is being now, in a Western science way. I would argue that Eastern science, medicine, has known about this for thousands of years and has been interacting with it, but we're now seeing it emerge in our Western science. And I'll give you an example. Michael Levin, again, one of my favorites, his name will come up a lot. He's been able to take a frog and have a frog regenerate its leg. Frogs don't naturally regenerate. But he's able to manipulate the bioelectric current to turn on the algorithm to grow a leg. He doesn't have to micromanage it. He doesn't. The frog already knows how to make a leg. It knows how to drive every reaction that's needed to produce a leg. So all he has to do is turn on the algorithm for leg, and it grows a leg. Perfect legs.
Yeah, turn on the grow factor and turn off the inhibition factor. Right, sort of maybe simultaneously. I don't know, because it's right now
not even that, because now you're into micromanaging, right? And so his whole thing is we don't know enough to micromanage these processes, but the organism already has in it a subroutine to grow a leg. All you have to do is turn on the leg routine, and it grows a leg. So he's made a 6-legged frog, right? And how?
Really, a 6-legged frog?
6-legged frog. Yep. And the legs are the frog's alive, and the legs work. He's growing an eye on the tail of a tadpole. He's been able to, in a mouse model, regenerate half of an amputated limb. And so the goal here is obviously human regenerative medicine. But he's been able to show that if you know the bioelectric signal to turn on, if you know where to find the subroutine and how to stimulate it, you can turn on that routine and it will do its thing reliably every time.
Yeah, fascinating. I can think of some fairly humorous things here with regards to this, right? Like going through the airport and needing a third arm or something, right? So, so that's okay. So this is fascinating. So they've done it in those areas. Have they done it in mammals?
So the mouse is the closest mammal model where they're regrowing. So they've done it in numerous reptiles, and then he does a lot of his base work in planaria. So producing a 2-headed planaria, for example, worms. And again, what he's doing in these models is proof of concept. Like his ability to prove that, say, memory isn't really in the brain. Memory is held in the bioelectric template of the organ itself. And he's, again, been able to prove this over and over again. And so this brings these ideas that we're talking about information processing and intelligence to a level that Western biology has really just not had in it prior.
So are you pushing into consciousness here?
So this is the conversation. And again, there's a whole group of scientists now that are absolutely fascinating, having these long form conversations about consciousness and this idea, again, this TAME model, the technological approach to mind everywhere, is basically saying consciousness goes all the way down, right? That there's consciousness is at every level. Consciousness just is the fundamental substrate.
Right.
But to have this conversation being happening within hard science research institutions, that's the novelty. It's not the philosophical types or the spiritual types. It's
taking the biggest skeptics, if you will, and actually them being able to find their way through their technologies into a space of, like universal consciousness or sense of intelligence or some of these kinds of things, which is kind of, that's very cool.
It's for me, after 30 years of kind of fighting against this, to see our side, the Western scientific model, just in the early stages of this emerging into the research, the academic consciousness, but to see good solid research being done and what it can produce. I mean, they're moving fast in terms of what they're able to do, and that's so exciting about this area that's going to open up for us.
So let me bring it back a little bit then to what you're actually doing. So it sounds like you're probably harnessing these microcurrents, this bioenergetic, this being able to read the body, understand what it's doing, maybe where it's lacking, and feeding it back in. Sort of, I don't know if this is an element of kind of rewriting the software for the body through some of this signaling to kind of encourage it to go in a different direction than where it's currently stuck. But how does this translate into kind of what you're doing now? Sure.
Yeah. So great question. And we were talking about microcurrent. That was, again, my early introduction and my off ramp, and our conversational off ramp was microcurrent. But it is, for me, it moved on to light, so photobiomodulation, and I moved into after. Kind of going from more of an orthopedic side to a brain side. And now I've spent the last 6 years really focused on the brain and doing bioelectric medicine for the brain specifically. And so now I have 3 brain clinics where we focus doing, neuroimaging, neurofeedback, neurostimulation, really focused on the brain. And so that's been my main focus. And the main thing for today is really for me kind of talking about the brain side, but everything we say about the brain has application in the body.
So let me ask you this. What's the construct that you're working with when you're looking at the brain? So you're doing imaging. Is this bioenergetic imaging, or is it things like EEG or MRI or functional MRI or CT? Or what are we talking about? SPECT scans?
For us, my clinic, it's quantitative electroencephalograph, QEG. So EEG.
QEG. Okay.
Yep, QEG. That's our form of neuroimaging. But I would, it's not unusual for me to also interact with, like I do a lot of dementia work. So a person has come in, they've had a SPECT scan and an MRI. And so we're merging data across multiple neuroimaging models. But I generally find from a functional standpoint, EEG is our preferred, because it tells us function at the level of the voxel or the level of the neuron, as opposed to anatomy, which is helpful if you have an anatomical problem but tells you nothing about function.
Right.
Everything else is a one step removed proxy for brain function. So fMRI is oxygen consumption.
Right.
So
SPECT scans are blood flow, and MRI itself is imaging, to your point, just so the audience understands this. So, in cardiology, where I, grew up, so to speak, interventional cardiology, we came to realize that really to understand what was going on, we needed both the anatomy and the physiology to actually have a feel for what was happening. Without both those elements, we were kind of lost. So the fact that you have had a brain scan done or had a CT of the head or had whatever, or a SPECT scan even, doesn't mean that you've actually fully understood the organ from that single test. And you have to look at medical testing is actually like giving you a lens to look at it, at the subject with, but it doesn't give you the full picture. And so it's kind of like you have to put together many times you have to put together multiple vantage points, looking through multiple lenses to actually get a more comprehensive view of what's going on. We Absolutely. Find that to be true all the time. Yeah, I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. So like I say, we might, like for me, I would specialize in doing the QEG, and then the new gold standard is ERP, so event-related potential. So we do both, so a resting state EEG and a task-based ERP, so we can look at the brain doing nothing and the brain doing something. But then we would, equally do a computer-based neuropsych exam, and then, a full panel of functional medicine, blood tests, all of that. So again, we get, as you said perfectly, you get all these different perspectives. Can never have all of them, but you get as many as you can and put them together and say, what does this tell me kind of objectively about this person? And then of course you want to have the bulk of your information coming from the person themselves. But we, kind of combining all of these different objective measures, or as many as we can, to give us as much information to make a decision on a treatment plan, and then to some degree to be able to track the success of that treatment plan over time.
Yeah, and I would actually think that you're, based on these assessments, that you're actually making diagnoses that have been made through other forms of assessment, but you probably have your own refined way of making a diagnosis. Like, for example, somebody with early cognitive decline, which is really reasonably late cognitive decline, you probably have a way of looking at the brain that actually gives you insight into that diagnosis that's a little bit different than, say, the particular criteria that might be seen elsewhere. I'm suspecting that you're kind of making diagnosis in a little bit of a richer environment. Is that also part of this?
So we would like to think so, and there's a very technical conversation to be had around this, but the piece that I feel is very helpful for our goal, which our goal being to restore function. The way we like to say it is, what we do is regulate dysregulation. That's what we do. We don't treat anxiety or depression or dementia or Parkinson's. We regulate dysregulation. That's what we do. And so
you regulate or you re-regulate?
Sure. There's something to be parsed there, but
right.
But what a QEG gives us is a very fine grain look at how is this area talking to this area, and so how is the anterior cingulate talking to the posterior cingulate, and we can look at that in terms of, are they talking too much? Are they talking too little? So are they hyper connected or hypo connected? Are they talking in the right language? So delta, theta, alpha, beta, 1, 2, 3, gamma. Are they talking in the right language to each other? So we're looking at like that in a very specific way. And then we would say, like, we have a normative model, kind of a neurotypical model that it's compared against. And we say, okay, well, we've got an anterior posterior cingulate that is hyper connected and in beta, and we'd really like to see that in beta 3, and we'd like to see that in beta 2. That would be a more optimal. So then the question becomes, what can we apply from a bioelectric standpoint to both reduce that hyperconnectivity and slow it down to a more neurotypical communication. So they're speaking the right language, right? And so that's what we do, right? And
Okay,
that's
so now you're really, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it sounds like one of my tenets in health in general is that almost all of it comes down to reprogramming, what I would call reprogramming or optimally programming the brain, right? Whether it's cognitive ability, mental health, proprioception, the way we move, athletic performance, sexual performance, anything you want to talk about, it's really about optimizing that. So you're actually going about this by then entraining the brain with these electrical signals to kind of go back into the re-regulated, I'll call it, format that correlates with the quote unquote normal. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, so you've named one part of it, entrainment. So I think of entrainment as brain function, but we are also looking at brain physiology.
Okay.
So I roughly kind of divide up my devices into what affects and regulates brain physiology and what affects and regulates brain function. And now some devices cut across both of those.
Sure.
Some of the devices just do one and they don't do the other. Some are better at one and not so good at the other. But I very much look at it from a physiology standpoint as well as a brain function, which I would put entrainment into a brain function standpoint. Because, for example, for entrainment, right, you're trying to get, let's say, neurons to pulse at 10 hertz, so alpha. Right? And so maybe I use visual entrainment, one of the strongest forms of entrainment that we have. So I'm getting the optic nerve to pulse at 10 hertz by flashing a 10 beats per second light in the eye. So now we've lit up the optic nerve, the whole optic chiasm, and a good chunk of the occipital lobe. Right? And as I'm firing, getting the optic nerve to fire off, the neurons around it will pick up that 10 hertz pulse and start pulsing at 10 hertz. That's entrainment, right? And so we can leverage this feature that neurons have that they tend to entrain to get parts of the brain to do what we want them to do by using light, sound, electricity to deliver a pulse, to start entrainment, and thereby change brain function in that way. Now, are we also affecting physiology? We are, but we have to pretend for a moment that we're just talking about brain function when we're talking about function, and not muddle the two, or else we get hopelessly lost.
Right. So what about if you have neurons that are dysfunctional from the standpoint of, beta amyloid, tau proteins, stiff membranes, diminished electrical current, pruned synapses, and then, there's a lot to be kind of corrected, if you will. And is the electrical signal enough to, are we trying to kind of take a sick horse and make it run again, or are we actually rehabilitating the horse so it can run again? I'm assuming it may be some of both, but walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, great questions. So this is what I kind of lay out to my clients when we're talking about, here's what we're going to do, and this is why these devices. So, so I need to, move back and forth a little bit between the brain physiology and the brain function categories in the beginning. But let's say when we're starting with somebody, and let's pick something like dementia, just to give us something. But it could be Parkinson's, dystonia, it could be a traumatic brain injury. There's any number of things. It could be, autism.
What about PTSD? What about PTSD?
PTSD, absolutely. We know that there's a network switch that has been flipped, and our work is to unflip that switch. But let's say something like dementia, where we have multi-system issues happening. We need a multi-system approach to it. So one of the things why, I'll use a audiovisual entrainment device and encourage my clients, we want to have this as part of our plan. Why? Because there's function that's there that has been knocked offline because of the larger thing that's happening in the brain, the issues. Function that could be there has been knocked offline. So we want to restore that. So this might be somebody having a restoration of function in the first week of treatment. They're all excited. They're like, "Oh my goodness, you're reversing my dementia." No, we're not. We're just getting function that was there back online, and that's a good thing for all kinds of reasons. But I call that the low-hanging fruit. We want to just restore what's there. We're not approaching the disease at all. So we layer in the technologies to restore function. Then we layer in the technologies to start combating the disease process. So we have to pick where. So let's say inflammation. Inflammation is a big deal in most neurodegenerative conditions. I would go with near infrared light as my best approach for tamping down neuroinflammation. Now, of course, diet, lifestyle, absolutely, that goes without saying, but I'm not talking diet and lifestyle today. I'm talking bioelectric medicine. So we're presuming also doing diet and lifestyle. Although in our clients who refuse to to change their diet and refuse to exercise, we still get really good results because these technologies are potent. But it goes better for the people who do the whole thing, of course. So right now, I'm just going to focus on the bioelectric medicine. So we put in near infrared light, and it reduces inflammation. So right off the bat, we pick up both a positive change in physiology, which also will have some correlates in brain function. So we're returning a little bit of function, but mostly we're tamping down a degenerative condition to set an environment for hopefully what happens is regeneration, right? We're not just having less of a negative. Down the road, we're going to get a positive. So then also we could talk about the lymphatic system, right? So the detox system of the brain. So how do we get either just toxins that have accumulated, but things like amyloid and tau, how do we get them out? Well, we reinvigorate the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system, the waste removal system of the body, is got a different name in the brain. It's the lymphatic system. So we want to stimulate the lymphatic system to help start clearing things out. Right?
So how do you do that? Because my understanding of the lymphatic system is that it works at night during slow wave sleep. That's when it's really most active, if you will. Even to the point of it's most active when your right cheek is on the pillow as opposed to your left cheek. But that being said, anything you can do to activate waste removal in any organ, quite honestly, is a good thing. So how is it that you're stimulating the lymphatic system? Is that also with light? Or
so light is going to be one of our best tools. But again, my approach isn't, just use light. I use all of these. It's always a multimodal approach because we get better results that way. So
maybe this, maybe this would be a good juncture for you to explain to the audience, or show the audience, if you will, kind of the range of tools that you have and techniques, and then maybe we can circle back and get a little bit better feel for how they integrate with each other. Does that seem reasonable?
It does, yes. Perfect. Let's do that. So I'm going to we're going to do a screen share here. So this will be great for anybody who's watching the video. We'll try and do our best to give a description for those who are going to be listening to the podcast only. So let me jump into, actually I'm going to pause here for just a moment, because one of the questions that I get almost every time I talk with a client or I do a presentation, people ask about the research. Now I know you're familiar with this area, there's robust research, but just in the area of neuromodulation, right, this is a Google Scholar search, 360,000 research articles on neuromodulation. Since 2022, there's 19,000, and just to date in 2023, there's a little over 2,500 research articles in neuromodulation. So plenty of research being done. If we jump into...
And here's the thing, just so the audience understands this, I just was at a conference speaking, and there was an orthopedist there talking about stem cells from his perspective. And I brought up several other things to him. He said, well, there's no data for any of that. And the funny thing is, he's never bothered to look for a paper, and yet there are literally thousands of papers about these things. So my point is that when you talk to your regular doctor and they say, well, there's no evidence for that, there's no data for that, there's no research for that, you have to understand that they're only reading the journals that they're used to looking at, attending the conferences that they go to. And so they're actually not aware of literally thousands of articles and really high quality research that's being done outside of what they're used to looking at. So when you talk to your local doctor about it, realize that you're getting a very jaded perspective on their part, and that there really is robust research for all the things that we talk about here on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I lecture annually at the local medical school, and I've been doing that for 25 years. And I am chronically horrified by how little they know outside of what they were taught.
That's right.
And that's the thing. It's like you talk about the doctor who's only reading the journals they read. That's if your doctor reads journals, period.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And again, this is not me ripping on doctors. I love doctors. But it's just a reality of their world. When they were in medical school, the curriculum they were being taught was 20 years old.
That's right.
So you graduate, you're a brand new doctor, your information is 20 years old. Now you've been practicing for 20 years, your information is 40 years old. And yet that doctor's still practicing and holding themselves in the treatment room to be the knower. And
that's right.
And telling the patient, oh no, I wouldn't do that. That sounds risky, or that's dangerous. And probably they actually have no information at all on the topic.
That's right.
And
that's right.
That's just the state of today's modern Western medicine. And again, we've got doctors who we've forced into these tiny little treatment rooms and said, you have 10 minutes with the patient and you need to spend 8 minutes of that on the computer filling out the forms so to get reimbursement from the insurance companies. And then we call that medicine. I mean, it's terrible. So not the doctor's fault. They're pigeonholed into a system that does not serve them or their patient. But it is to say to the consumer, you best not use your doctor as the measure of
that's right
of progressive medicine.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So then in the area of electrical stimulation, again, I did Google Scholar search. We have 3.5 million research articles on electrical stimulation. Since 2022, 17,000. To date in 2023, 14,000. I do about 6 hours of continuing education a week in bioelectric medicine, and I don't make a dent in what is produced in terms of research every week. Just the new research that's happening every week. I can barely scratch the surface of it, and I'm trying. So that is to say, there's no shortage of research. So again, so for those of who are listening but can't see, we've got a couple of our devices up on the screen. If you're able to see the video of this, it's great. So 2 of our devices, this is our infrared helmet and our nasal and ear laser. Mostly when it comes to brain, we're thinking nasal laser more than the ears. But we have things produced by red and near infrared light. Their effects are the same. It's depth of penetration that's different. Red light about 1/2 inch, and near infrared light 3 to 4 inches. So it's a penetration difference, but in terms of function, 11 benefits of near infrared. You get those 11 benefits, whether it's red or near infrared. So we have neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, angiogenesis. So that's growth factors to help produce more nerves, growth factors to help grow more synapses, growth factors to produce more vasculature. So we increase cerebral blood flow, we increase mitochondrial activity. Often with mitochondrial activity, the big thing is ATP production, so energy production. We get excited about that, for sure. It's a big deal, especially in a neurodegenerative condition. But also, we have to keep in mind that mitochondria do a number of important things. One, they balance the amount of reactive oxygen species. So reactive oxygen species can be a positive or a negative. It's an essential component of electrical transactions. So the mitochondria help balance the right amount of that. The other is cell signaling. Mitochondria do a lot of cell signaling. So we were talking earlier about the intelligence, like the mind at a local level. Mitochondria play a big role in maintaining that local electrical communication or information network, and so restoring that is really restoring that capacity. It's like your computer, putting in more memory chips so your computer can work faster, more efficiently. This is roughly an equivalent. So it's anti-inflammatory. It dramatically affects the microglial cells, which microglia do a lot. One is maintenance of the interior of the brain, so keeping neurons healthy, clearing out toxins, and then the kind of the waste product of the microglia is the precursors to myelin. So if you want to keep your nerves myelinated, you want your microglia doing their job of eating up toxins and kind of pooping out the precursors to myelin. And then we have stem cell activation. And the list could go on, but this is just some of what near infrared light does. And then we deliver that with these two devices, the whole cortex with the helmet, and then the nasal laser to do the underside of the brain, so kind of hippocampus. So then we jump into audiovisual entrainment. So this is flashing lights in the eyes, binaural beats in the ears, and transcranial stimulation. All three of those modes in one device, which is why we love this device, because we have these three modalities. And here again, we're going to increase cerebral blood flow. We're going to improve neural synchrony, which is a really important part of brain function. We're going to improve the thalamocortical loop, which is a big deal, again, in brain function, but also if we're talking about dementia, this is one of the core functions that's under attack. So restoring it is vital. Balancing neurotransmitters, again, we're stimulating microglia. We're able to affect the blood pressure system. So through the autonomic nervous system, we can normalize blood pressure. We can release heat shock proteins, which is part of the recovery process in the body, and specifically in the brain. And then we have a huge impact on mood, sleep, and cognition through brain function with this device. So it's great for anxiety, depression, sleep, things of that nature, focus, concentration.
So this kind of looks a little bit like a BrainTap device. You're probably familiar with BrainTap.
I am.
Yep.
Yep. So it's similar to BrainTap. It has some important features that I choose to use this device because it brings more functionality to the client. Right? But yeah, BrainTap.
What's the name of this device?
So this one is the David Delight Pro.
Okay.
Yep. So then to the David Delight Pro, we have an add-on piece that so you can play music through the David Delight Pro. In this case, we don't just use music; we use special sound files. So here, what we're seeing on the screen is pink noise. Pink noise is the background rhythm of the brain. So if you just listened to or recorded neural activity, not specific neural activity, but the whole brain activity, it matches the audio pink noise 1/f slope. So what you have here, you see in this picture, it shows this graph here is the pink noise versus a white noise, which is really just a horizontal flat line. Pink noise is this nice slope. This top graphic, you'll see the electrical pink noise is measured in the brain. And then plotted over top of that is the actual brain signal, the EEG signal. And we see that a healthy brain has a peak here in that 1/f pink noise slope. It has a peak at 10 hertz or alpha. So what we see is, the reason we do this is we give the brain pink noise stimulation to augment its kind of normal background rhythm to help fill in the gaps. So what we see in whether it's a traumatic brain injury or dementia is this background rhythm gets affected. And so it's a global impact on brain function. So restoring this 1/F is an important part of the overall process of recovery for this brain. So we add in pink noise as a way to do this. And then here you'll see there's a silicone cap that a person can put on. So this is for our home use that allows people to do
it. Kind of looks like an EEG cap.
Correct. It is. We are using not a standard EEG cap, but a version of a low-cost, low-tech EEG cap. So it has all the 1020 markings on it for accessing the standard brain regions. So it's a well-known, well-documented, way to do an intervention, but make it simple for the clients. You can just say, put a sensor at T4 and it's marked. They know where it is. They don't have to know neurophysiology. So this allows people to do a more true transcranial stimulation in an at-home setting.
Mm-hmm.
So
with the transcranial stimulation, what are you putting in there? What's the stimulation? Is it electrical current or magnetic?
It is. Okay. Correct. Yep. Okay. So this is transcranial alternating current stimulation. We can also do direct, but I would say most of the time, the suite of devices that I'm sending to people are going to have a device that does alternating current stimulation. Mm-hmm. And I would move away from that if it was indicated. But
I had some headphones called Halo Sport headphones that went out. The company went out of business, unfortunately, but they had some transcranial electrical stimulation headphones that really kind of, when you put the headphones on, the conducting elements were kind of running across the motor cortex between, if you draw a line between your ears, you're kind of getting the homunculus for the motor cortex. So I found it really fascinating because if you wear those things for this prescribed sort of 20 minutes before you would engage in an activity, it would significantly change kind of your functional approach. In other words, all of a sudden you'd be shooting a basketball better. You'd be riding your mountain bike better in a flow state. It would open up sort of a neuroplasticity in that area that would enable you to learn something faster and do something more efficiently, which I found really fascinating. So with what you're doing here, are you trying to get more neuroplasticity, more spectrum of brain activity here? Or what are you trying to do with this exactly?
So great question. It really depends. There's so much we can do.
Sure.
So I'll give you an example again with my dementia folks. Let's say maybe they have more of a frontotemporal dementia. So we know that there's a particular problem there. And then let's say maybe memory is an issue. Or let's say executive function, decision-making planning is an issue. So we might do the transcranial alternating stimulation with electrodes kind of at the temples, roughly. So F7, F8, right there on the sides of the frontal lobe. At the same time, we're doing the visual entrainment and auditory entrainment at, say, gamma. So we're giving the brain gamma, so 40 hertz. So MIT's study on 40 hertz stimulating the removal of amyloid and tau and increasing microglial activity. So we're affecting physiology, but also gamma is a meta brainwave that organizes the brainwaves underneath it. So, and one of the deficiencies in dementia is gamma, right? We call it in the clinic when we look at a QEEG, we call it blue brain. That these higher frequencies are absent and the map is just blue. So we're stimulating gamma, so they're getting electrical gamma through the frontal lobe. And we're doing all of those things I just said, but we're also trying to specifically restore executive function, which is primarily a frontal lobe issue. But if that person, let's say we treat them 6 months in, they're like, hey, my executive function has improved, but my memory really isn't coming along. We take those electrodes, we move them back to behind the ears where we're targeting the hippocampus. And now we're going to run theta through the hippocampus. Theta is known for its ability for both memory formation and memory retrieval. And so we might still be running, gamma for the whole brain, but now we're running gamma and theta specifically for the hippocampus for the memory issue. So there's, the number of tools that we have here. We have a number of sophisticated tools, and what we can affect. There's a large range of brain function, brain activity, brain physiology. And so it's really finding out for this person where they're at in their recovery process. What is the protocol we're going to have them do this week, maybe for 3 months, 6 months. And then as that brain starts to change and function starts to return, we can shift the protocol to what's the next thing that's needed. So it gives us a lot of flexibility. But yes, to all of those things you said, increased neuroplasticity. Maybe we're going to work in the motor strip for all the reasons that just treating the motor strip is beneficial across the board. But we may also go kind of, front on the forehead and the back of the head to go down the center of the brain and get the anterior posterior cingulate for, again, executive function, emotional intelligence, and regulation down into the brainstem through that particular mechanism.
So I'm curious, do you work with people on the spectrum or people with autism? Do you have success with them utilizing this approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there is no one autism,
sure,
right? There's the autism spectrum, but even we tend to think of the spectrum as more about severity, and it isn't. That's not really the right way to think about it, because you can have somebody who is expressing autism as a behavior. It looks like autism on the outside, but their brain might be pretty much neurotypical.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, the functional components that are all there, wired up as again they ought to be, are functioning in a way that person looks to have autism. But that's very different than a brain that is not wired in a neurotypical way. That is like that kind of neurotypical isn't just happening, it's not there. That's a very different brain to work with than the brain where the wiring is there, but for whatever reason it isn't producing the internal movement of information through networks that are there. It's just not moving the information through in a neurotypical way. That we can train pretty easily back towards neurotypical. For the brain where that wiring isn't there, then you can't just turn it, kind of restore it to kind of a neurotypical function. It's a whole different ballgame. So working with autism, you kind of need to know where are you and what's possible and that. But yes, I mean, we work with autism. It can be as simple as just doing something like photobiomodulation can have just a profound effect on behavior. Or it might need to be much more sophisticated in the clinic, doing high-end neurofeedback to really rebuild, or maybe not rebuild, but induce the building of neural pathways that aren't there developmentally, just didn't show up.
Yeah,
and
I get it.
That's a much heavier lift.
Okay.
So just running through things here to kind of get through my list. So we use an EEG tracker, primarily as an at-home sleep tracker, because all the things you were talking about, sleep and the importance of sleep for the lymphatic system and everything else that happens during sleep, memory consolidation.
So what you're showing here is a headband, just so the audience understands, a headband that has looks like a transducer on the forehead, and it's tracking EEG at night, I suspect. And then from that, you're basically developing a sleep study from that data.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Okay. So we have a 5-sensor EEG collection. We have a plethysmograph that's collecting blood circulation and heart rate, and it's got a gyroscope, so movement. So we're collecting a fair amount of data, and then we look at that to say, okay, how is this person doing in terms of deep sleep, which you can only really know with EEG data. Even there, you can't be guaranteed, but without EEG data, you're really guessing in the dark as to the sleep state a person is achieving.
So let me ask you that. So we have people wearing all kinds of trackers, right? Oura rings and Whoops and Apple Watches, and getting sleep data and looking at sleep data all the time. So how is this headband different, better, worse than, wearing one of those devices?
Sure. So get me into one of my favorite topics to rant about.
Okay.
So my take on wearables is they're reasonably decent for tracking one's own data over time to see trends.
Okay.
Like I would like say, yeah, I mean, having a ring or a watch or whatever that does that for you, that can be helpful. Problem is people look at that data and they compare it to other people. They compare it to objective measures that have come through other means of collection. And that's the place where, no, all bets are off.
The absolute value, what I'm hearing you say is that the absolute values may be suspect, but the values relative to you and relative to you over time are valuable in terms of showing change, if you will, progress or regression in some area.
If you're a healthy person, yes.
Yeah, if you're a healthy person.
Okay. If you're a healthy person, then yes, it's helpful as a trend for you over time. Great. What I see in the clinic, of course, is generally not healthy people. And they will come in with their wearable and say, oh, my HRV is really good, or I slept really well. And then we use clinic level equipment to actually test those things. And we find out that no, that their data is completely misleading. No. And so that's, again, wearables are great for people who are healthy. If you're not healthy, a wearable is unlikely to get you to healthy and might actually keep you away from it. As an example, we used we used a well-known HRV measuring device. I'll just avoid a brand name here. Made by a very reputable company, and we use that in the clinic. And we'd have our clients, anxious clients, they could ace it. They could have a show like 100% coherence and be having a panic attack. And so you're just like, what is this device doing if it can't tell me that this person sitting in front of me who I can see is having a panic attack, and the device says they're fine? So we threw those out, and that's what got us to in this area of biofeedback to move up to true clinic level biofeedback, where we have 10 independent leads monitoring 10 different autonomic functions, to be able to see what's actually happening in an autonomic nervous system, to tell how healthy or unhealthy, how well coordinated or uncoordinated is that autonomic nervous system.
Do you get that kind of information from the EEG headband that people sleep with at home?
We get a bit of it. So it is still not at the in-clinic level, but as a wearable goes, I can't say it's the closest on the market. There is actually one better, but they took it off the retail market and put it into the research market only. So now it's not accessible, but it was a better wearable in this regard. But this one that we use, there isn't one that is for the price, anywhere near the price that you have to pay.
What's the one that you're using?
So we're using the Muse S second generation. So the Muse headband, the sleep tracking headband.
Got it.
They do a good job, and you can actually export the EEG and put it into an analysis software, and it is decent considering how it's collected. it's reliable, right? So that's why we go with this one, is we feel confident in the information it's giving us and enough diverse data points that we can say something intelligent based on it.
So this has been a really fascinating conversation, as I thought it would be, Guy. Are there ways for people to track you down or get a hold of you? You have a website or somewhere that people can track down your clinics if they want to pursue some of your work further?
Certainly. So probably the easiest place is CerebralFit.com.
Okay.
So CerebralFit, all one word, CerebralFit.com. And then as far as there, they'll encounter a phone number and an email that will come right to me. They can book an online consult. We have a free 15-minute consult. We have a paid $75 45-minute consult. Mm-hmm. But also, I'll just say for those who are good at taking this information down in a spoken form. So my first initial and last name, so G Odishaw, so GODISHAW at cerebralfit.com. That's my email address. Reach out, have a conversation.
Okay, more. Beautiful. Well, thanks for being with us. And that'll end the regular podcast for H-Hackers. We're going to go into H-Hackers Plus content here in just a minute, but really enjoyed the conversation. Welcome to the H-Hackers Plus portion of this fascinating conversation we've been having with Guy Odishaw. Guy, I want to ask you a couple of additional questions here. And I think the first one is, what do you think we'll be doing, or you'll be doing, or we'll collectively be doing different 5 years from now?
Goodness. I mean, so one, just in the things that we were talking about, like, for example, the acquisition of QEG and how we do it now. We're on the cusp now of a revolution in the technology that allows us to collect EEG signals with near-infrared light, so near-infrared sensors, so FNIRS. It exists now, but there are some products that are just going through the FDA process that lower the cost dramatically, are highly reliable in terms of fidelity of the signal, aren't nearly as fussy. And so, where my setup probably costs $50,000 in the clinic, you'll be able to buy one for $5,000 that is many times better. I mean, yeah, nice. This device is so sensitive. You can have earbuds in listening to a song, and by reading your brain waves, it can tell what song you're listening to.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing. So, and that's like right on the cusp. Like, that's coming. That exists now. You just can't buy it yet. But yeah.
What's the time frame for that? Is it going through the FDA or something?
Yeah, they're going through the FDA process, and we all know that process can be ridiculously time consuming for not reasonable reasons. But
sure.
My guess is that some of that technology is going to come out around the FDA process, because companies are going to be frustrated by going through that process. So I think as clinicians, we will have it in our hands sooner than it will be a consumer level product.
Sure. That'll be exciting. Let me ask you this. Is there anything that keeps you up at night as you think about this, from the perspective of your patients or yourself, or from any perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things, as simple as, is like, it is utterly maddening to me, the resistance in the population to just what we've talked about. And I'll give you an example. We treat macular degeneration. Macular degeneration in Western medicine is considered untreatable. You get a diagnosis, you're going to slowly lose your eyesight over time, probably go blind. There's really nothing anybody can do. We're just going to hold your hand and get you adaptive therapies as you go blind. That is not how it needs to go. We have about an 85% efficacy rate for treating that condition. And trying to get doctors to listen, can't do it. 15 years cannot get a single doctor to have a serious conversation and refer a patient. We have all the evidence you could want to have, can't convince them. But you come to treating patients and you talk to patients and you say, hey, look, I can treat it. Their patients are so convinced it's untreatable that maybe 2 out of 10 will say yes. Just last week, I got an email from one of my new macular degeneration patients who took quite a bit of convincing for her to try the treatment. Well, she's 3 weeks into treatment, and she emailed to say, my largest blind spot is shrinking. I can see more now than I have in years. And that's going to keep going. And will we completely reverse the disease? I don't know, because you never know in any one individual. But have we in many, many people? Yes. This is an imminently treatable disease. And yet we cannot get cooperation. And so, and now it's very similar. So we call macular degeneration dementia of the, treating dementia. We have a growing collection of people who were either institutionalized or were on the cusp of being institutionalized, who are now living moderately normal lives.
That's amazing. No, that's really fascinating. It is fascinating how the mindset of the physician community has infiltrated the mindset of people at large to where they feel like they know what's possible and what's not possible, right? When in actual fact, everything is possible.
Right, exactly. You said it right there. It's that. It kills me when I'm talking to a family where one of the parents has dementia and maybe, the spouse is there and the kids are there and they're just saying, oh, we don't believe you. We don't think it's true. And I was like, what have you got to lose? Like, there's nothing to lose here. And still you're not going to help your loved one. That keeps me awake at night. It's like, how can I get better at doing what I'm doing? And that's not the technology. The technology is fine. It will get better, but it's the communication. It's building the rapport and the trust and finding the ways to get somebody who, as you said, is pre-programmed to say no to consider like a maybe. And
that's a tricky one. So let me ask you this. If you could design and execute one research project right now, do you have a sense of what that would be?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do. So again, I mentioned earlier, Michael Levin, and he's doing so much good work, not just in his lab and the related labs, but the conversations, the interdisciplinary conversations that he's having are impressive. And so like every day he's talking with experts in other fields and they're having these long form conversations. What I would like to see happen, is for us to use what's emerging in this area of bioelectric medicine as researched in the West, and this developing idea of mind at every level, combined with an Eastern medicine tradition, and pool these to find out, is, say, something like Chinese medicine and the layers of qi, when they talk about gu qi and wei qi and da qi and zong qi and jing qi, that they hold within the tradition as intelligences. Can we find those on the West and have a conversation here and take some of this knowledge base that's been around for thousands of years and import it into our Western and move things forward faster than we need to when we've got Western people who think this is a new idea that they're just discovering, and they're trying to find language for it, to just say, hey, these guys over here, I think they've got a language, they've got a map. We could move further faster. We could get out of the infancy state faster. So yes, if I could design a research project, it would be bringing these two together in the rigor of Western medicine, but with the open-mindedness that Eastern medicine has brought to it, in the sense of open to multiple forms of intelligence that here in the West we just have been completely closed to.
No, it's we're all about the logic. If it's not logical, you can't measure it and you can't touch it, then it can't be real, which is really an interesting fallacy to live within. So what are the top 3 hacks that you're using to epitomize your youthfulness? I assume it has something to do with keeping your brain healthy.
Yes. So I do my near-infrared helmet 30 to 90
Which
minutes
one do
every
you
day.
use?
So we have our own CerebralLight, which is, earlier when I threw up a picture, that's our helmet. So there's a few on the market. I would say, I mean, this is going to be like, of course, Guy, you have a helmet, so of course you're going to say yours. But there's a couple of us who are using the same helmet from the same manufacturer. They're essentially identical, but just to be obnoxious, we're different companies, so they have different brand names. And now you got to talk about, a CerebralLight over against a Neuronic or a whatever, and to the consumer, like the consumer should just know they're the same product. So don't get caught up in mine is better because it's orange. It's like, no. And when I talk with my clients, I tell them all of this. Like nothing is secret. There's no secret sauce. Nothing is proprietary. The consumer needs to know. They need to be informed. They need to know the truth, and that's what we do with all of our products. So we use a helmet that is out there in the market. I would put it at like the best choice. And if it wasn't the best choice, I would use a different helmet for price point and function. Like that's the thing is there's cheaper helmets, but with almost no functional usefulness to them. And there are more expensive ones that are fantastic, but they cost $10,000, and that's too much for most people, right? So I use our CerebralLight helmet. I do that every day. And then audiovisual entrainment. So the one we talked about, I use the David Delight Pro.
Okay.
I do that every day. And then one of my favorite devices is this one, just a red mouth guard for oral health. And I actually have one in my car. So when I make my commute to work, I pop in my mouth guard.
Oh, so it's putting red light. So you have a mouth guard that emits red light. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yep. So we have one that does red and one that does red and blue. And so you're basically all the benefits that you're getting from red light. So those 11 positive benefits, you're getting that into your teeth, into your gums, and the oral cavity as a whole. So we use that, for example, people going through chemo get oral mucositis. If we get them a mouth guard before they start chemo and they use it consistently, they can go through their whole chemo without developing sores. And that's huge. I mean, they're going through enough. They don't also need to have sores such that they can't eat and drink.
And then the final question I'd ask you is, if we were going to meet a year from now here again, and we were going to be celebrating something, is there something that you would like to be celebrating?
Yeah, I would like to be celebrated. Back to your earlier question, is I would like to see us have more people under care. I'd love to see these products in care facilities for, again, dementia, but it doesn't need to be that. Anything that is brain related. I would love to see these be frontline products and, in use. And I'll give you just a quick example. Dear friend of mine, known her for 30 some years, went through cancer, came out the other side, had a stroke, not unusual for a person who's been through that. She was going through kind of standard treatment, speech therapy, whatnot. When she reached out to me, she couldn't make a complete sentence. Her aphasia was so bad, she could not speak a full sentence. We got her going with the infrared helmet. And, by the end of 1 week, more words. By the end of 2 weeks, full sentences, but a lot of pauses. By the end of 3 weeks,
wow, that's fluent. Impressive.
Would not know that this person 3 weeks ago couldn't say a sentence.
Yeah.
And that was, Yeah, I mean, and that was just adding in the infrared helmet. Now, what I would say is, why was that not at the OT facility who was doing her speech and language?
Right.
And when they were doing her speech and language, she had a helmet on.
Right. No, it's
right?
crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
All of it's just crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I would like to see. And I don't particularly care if it's our company or another company, but it's the inroads into the practicing community.
Right.
To say, look, these devices work, they're safe, there's no adverse effect, right? Near infrared light, people say, well, is it dangerous? I go, well, do you go in the sun? Right? If you walk to your car, from your house to your car, and you're in the sun for 3 minutes, you just got more light energy than this helmet will give you in 30 minutes. Right? So you're gonna be fine.
Right? Let me ask you this: what about people with seizure disorders? Because sometimes that's a tricky wicket when you're trying to either regenerate the brain or modulate the brain. It's you can actually start to activate circuits that are quiescent, but now they become quasi-active, and then seizures can occur, things like that. Do you have any strategies for dealing with people with seizure disorders?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm about to say might sound kind of cavalier, but I don't mean it that way. We're not cavalier with it, but there is this sense of, oh, epileptics, they're delicate flowers. You have to be really careful. And we use all of our technology. We will use it with an epileptic client.
Okay.
Now you have to be intelligent about it, and you have to know the person. But we've never had one of our devices cause a seizure.
Okay.
Now, have we had seizure reduction? Absolutely. We've had incredible seizure reduction. We've never triggered one. So
do you get people off their anti-seizure medications, or is it just that you're giving them a better control?
So the range, we've taken people from having so few seizures, so not extreme epileptic, to no noticeable seizures. And again, we have to make a difference here, because the person might report, I'm not having any seizures, but I know by putting them under neuroimaging, their brain is producing what we call epileptiform activity.
Right.
So they don't think they're having a seizure, but their brain does.
Right.
So we have to, be careful around all of this. But it is to say, in general, it is not held as a no-go line of, oh, you can't do it because. It's like that's just not true. That's, again, it's kind of an old wives' tale. Now, do you have to do it thoughtfully, mindfully, and in the context of a particular patient and choose the technology? Yes. But when we do that, we've had no adverse outcomes, and we've had only positive outcomes.
Nice.
And yeah. So it speaks a lot to the robustness of the technology, how it's impacting the brain, and when you generally help a brain do what brains do, a lot gets better. Like, you get a lot for a little change, because a brain is an intelligent organ. Like, it is intelligence. When you give that brain a bit of a resource, it does a lot more with it than what you think, because it's intelligent.
Cool.
Right? And I feel like that's the piece that gets left out, and it's where we started, right? And our conversation was around this idea of intelligence, and we have this idea that we're treating kind of inert material or dumb material, or just a substrate. We're just pushing around chemicals.
Yeah.
But actually, we're treating intelligent materials that are designed by nature to solve problems.
Yeah, they have a vector towards health. Sometimes they need a push, or they need a ladder to climb, or a directional signal as to where to go, or whatever the analogy is. Right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Exactly.
Well, Guy, it's been such a pleasure. I really appreciate you hanging on for the extra time here to chat through some of these other questions. So it's been great, really great.
It's been a delight chatting with you. I have the feeling we could do this for an entire day. I mean,
I'd be interested to come visit.
I can tell what's running in the back of your mind by your questions. And
yeah, exactly right. So no, it'd be fun to come see one of your clinics. Are they all in Minnesota someplace or Wisconsin or?
Correct. So my 3 brain health clinics are all in Minnesota, and then CerebralFit is virtual. So we treat all of North America. We have some global, but mostly just North America. We do have a couple brick and mortars. We have a Bredesen clinic where we do just dementia and Alzheimer's, and then we have more of a kind of an omnivorous clinic where we do more mental health, traumatic brain injury, peak performance.
Yeah, we'll reach out and make contacts around some things I'm already thinking about. So that'd be fun. Good. All right.
Wonderful. All right.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.